All right, our second paper of the session, Kenichiro Masaoka, is going to be talking about optimizing color grading with the Gamut Rings color scope. Masaoka-san is a senior engineer at the NHK Foundation, and he is known for his contributions to image quality, including BT2020 colorimetry, ultra-high definition, visual performance evaluation, the invention of Gamut Rings for color capability assessment, and MTF measurement methods for digital cameras and electronic displays. So please welcome.
Thank you for your kind introduction. I'm very glad to have this opportunity to give a presentation here today. This is the outline of my talk, and first I brief the history of color science, and I explain the difference between chromaticity gamut and color gamut, and introduce the C-Lab gamut metric and its two-dimensional visualization method called Gamut Rings. The human retina contains three different types of cone cells. They have distinct spectral sensitivities underlying the physiological basis of color perception. In 1905, Marcel introduced the color order system. He defined hue, value, and chroma in a cylindrical space that was designed for perceptual uniformity. But the space was not colorimetric. And in 1931, the CIE standardized the basic colorimetry with stimulus values of XYZ and based on the chromatic functions. And they also introduced the XY chromaticity diagram. And the colorimetry was constructed for practical color reproduction. For example, Y corresponds to luminance, but the space lacks perceptual uniformity. So from 1940s and 1970s, many efforts were conducted to bridge the gap between the uniform Marcel space and the CIA's colorimetric space. And in 1976, C-Lab was standardized. Lightness L star, chroma C star, and hue angle H were defined in a perceptually uniform space. And here are the equations of the C-Lab model. XYZ values are normalized for each, which oversimplifies the chromatic adaptation. So it's called the wrong cat, and making the C-Lab accurate only around this D65 white point. This shows the RGB triangles in XY and U prime, B prime chromaticity diagrams, and these areas are often called color gamut. However, the XY and U prime, B prime areas are not proportional, and many people believe that the U prime, B prime space is more uniform than the XY space. Because of McAdam ellipses. You can see that in the XY diagram, the very large ellipse, which indicates the low chromaticity density. So the region is very low density. And in the U prime, B prime, the ellipses represents the JND of perceptual chromaticity. And the U prime, B prime diagram, the ellipses look more rounded and similar in size, which means the U prime, B prime space can be more perceptually uniform. However, these data were sparsely sampled from just one observer, showing low reproducibility. And this shows the chromaticity density maps based on the CIE Delta E2000. And chromaticity density is normalized at the D65 white point in each diagram. And you can see in the XY diagram, a very dark region, which means the low chromaticity density. That corresponds to the largest McAdam ellipse. But however, in the U prime, V prime chromaticity diagram, we can also see the very dark regions. and the average chromaticity density of the U prime B prime space is smaller than that of the XY space, even in the Rex 79 RGB triangle. So I would say the McAdam ellipses are a trick, and neither XY nor U prime B prime is uniform. Furthermore, the chromaticity diagrams lack luminance or lightness axis, limiting their ability to fully represent perceptual color differences. So we must distinguish chromaticity gamut from color gamut. The color gamut of the display is described as a 3D range in the D50 serial space, which was standardized by SID, CIE, and IEC. And the brown cat is replaced with the Bradford cat, and the D50 serial is also used in ICC profiles. However, the visualization is challenging. It's usually difficult to understand the size and shape of the 3D color gamut without rotating the 3D plot. This shows the Google image search results on color volume, and we can see the many different types of 3D renderings. It's worse than the RGB triangle. So it reminded me of the epigraph by Tafte. Even though we navigate daily through a perceptual world of 3 spatial dimensions and reason occasionally about higher dimensional arenas with mathematical ease, the world portrayed on our information display is caught up in the 2-dimensionality of the endless flatland of paper and video screen. All communications between the readers of the image and makers of the image must now take place on the 2-dimensional surfaces. Escaping this flatland is the essential task of envisioning information. That's true, so I devised the gamut rings. That's a 2-dimensional visualization of color gamut. Gamut rings unwrap the serial gamut into concentric rings in a 2D diagram arranged in polar coordinates, preserving hue angle, and the ring areas are proportional to gamut volume. This is the gamut ring framework, and I have the animation version here. First, I divide the gamut solid into 10 pieces and stabilize them and stretch them into plates, and stretch the second bottom plate further, making a hole and put around the bottom plate. And this process is repeated for the other plates, making gamut rings. There are 10 concentric rings, each spanning 10 unit lightness range. And the lightness increases from the near black inner ring to near white outer ring. And the hue angle is preserved in polar coordinates, and the chroma is radial distance from the inner side of each ring. The gamut rings were standardized in SID, CIE, and IEC in 2021, and portrait displays added gamut rings support in their Karma software last year, and Rating.com adopted gamut rings in their test bench 2.0 this year. Here is the quote from their changelog, but I found some errors here because it was among the transition from the chromaticity gamut to color gamut. And the chromaticity gamut test has been removed completely as the 2D chromaticity plots much of the industry uses are no longer considered to be valid way to measure color gamut. So they abandoned the RGB triangle metric, and the gamut rings have replaced this test. And next up is about the conventional color scopes and the new color scope. This is a screenshot of DaVinci Resolve, and the professional colorists and many YouTubers are using this video editing software and monitoring these color scopes. to adjust colors. This shows the RGB cube. It's a signal domain representation. It's a basis for scope transformations. In the middle, in the YCBCR space, we can observe the affine transformed RGB cube. And the hue angle and saturation represented in polar form in the CBCR diagram from the top view, forming hexagonal CBCR boundary. We can see the hexagonal boundary. In large Y XY space, the gamut has a complex shape. It has a vertical walls and 3 vertical walls and 1 triangle floor and the curved roofs. But from the top view, it's a triangle. Okay. So I devised Gamut rings color scope because conventional scopes lack perceptual uniformity. And the ring scope enables simultaneous monitoring of lightness, chroma, and hue angle in a perceptually uniform 2D layout. And I decided to use the D65 syrup space anchored to the input signal white. This is how to map the internal color samples onto rings. During the stabilization of the slanted gamut pieces along the L-star axis, scale each internal color sample's C-star relative to the boundaries of its L-star H plane, and flatten each piece while preserving the relative chroma position of all internal samples. And I took a RAD-based approach for implementation. First, rasterize the gamut ring images, say 600 square pixels, and generate a RAD mapping all RGB codes to pixel indices to 256 cubed entries for 8-bit RGB. And during the visualization, each input pixel is moved to its designated ring location. And I used the MATLAB, achieving 15 FPS at 720p HD input on a typical consumer laptop without explicit GPU programming. And my app supports direct show devices. Demonstration. This image shows the mid-tone gradation in the sky, and in the ring scope, we can see the 2 hue angles of pale orange and pale purple with mid-tone gradations. In the chromaticity scope, the mid-tone gradations are overlapped by the bright colors, and also the chromaticities near black are widely scattered. The vector scope plots the hue angle and saturation of the pale orange and pale purple. However, the gradations are compressed and near black colors are often invisible. This video clip shows the yellow frames, and I'm controlling the gain. And as the gain decreases, the color distribution shifts from the outer ring toward the inner ring, while hue angles remains unchanged. Okay, and now I control the saturation. Now the distribution in each ring curves toward its inner boundary when desaturated. The colors on each ring go to the inner boundary. In the chromaticity scope, the distribution remained unchanged by gain, as expected, because chromaticity diagrams lack the luminance and lightness axis. Okay. And here I'm controlling the gain on the left side and the saturation on the right side. And the distribution contracts when either gain or saturation is reduced, indicating that the changes in the gain and saturation cannot be distinguished thoroughly with the vector scope. Okay. Now I control the hue angle. This video clip shows the woods and green leaves changing in hue. And in the ring scope, we can see the hue rotation with gradations. In the chromaticity scope, the hue angle is a little bit ambiguous. In the vector scope, we can see the hue angle rotation, but the gradation is lost. In case of skin tone, the vector scope shows the skin tone angle, but the distribution is very small, so we have to enlarge the scope. The display rendering transform, or DRT, plays a critical role in tone mapping. And the original HDR image had yellow flowers and pink flowers like this. And for creating SDR images, I use two DRTs. One is the default DaVinci DRT, and the other one is a saturation preserving DRT. And as I expected, in the saturation preserving DRT, we can observe the more higher chroma in the image than that by the DaVinci DRT. And in the ring scope, the chroma increase is visualized on the right hand, and the yellow flower, we can see the distinct yellow and pink hue angles. And also a slight hue angle shift of the yellow towards the red is also observed in the ring scope. In the vector scope, saturation increase is also visible. However, the yellow and the saturation preserving DRT appears less saturated than that by DaVinci DRT. Because DaVinci yellow is near the BT2020 yellow vertex of the vector scope hexagon. So this shows the BT79 RGB triangle and the BT2020 RGB triangle, and the colors outside the BT79 triangle are out of gamut. However, some bright colors can be out of gamut of 79. You can see some gap between the BT2020 roof and the BT79 roof. The colors in this gap are out of gamut. I'm showing the video clip, and the out of gamut pixels are in magenta. And in the ring scope, we can see the out of gamut pixels and with the hue angle and the lightness levels. Okay. In the chromaticity scope, the lightness information is gone, and the hue angle is very ambiguous. We can see the RGB triangle, but some colors are out of gamut even in the 79 triangle. In vector scope, the boundary of out of gamut colors is very ambiguous, so it's not useful for out of gamut test. Recently, I used the ring scope for camera matching. Colors reproduced different cameras often don't match. I used the Sony camera and Ikigami camera, and the bottom shows the each camera's image, and the yellow umbrella on the left camera is more saturated than that by the right camera. But the video engineers have to match these colors very quickly on set. And this shows the Gamut ring scope results, and the scope manifests the difference difference of the yellow saturation between the two cameras. HD applications of a ring scope, it's a challenging because CF defines the lightness up to 100 L star. The HDR exceeds this range. A possible solution will be using the variable L star setting and adding the extra rings for highlights. And FF Pictures and NHK implemented the HDR version Gamut ring color scope, and it was the 4K HDR real-time rendering. But we use the GPU-specific programming and shoot colors on the rings, though. Trial application in NHK program production. Currently, ring scope is used in pre-shoot look tests for NHK's morning drama involving direction, art, and technical teams to check colors in costumes, makeup, and sets, redefining and sharing the overall color plan. Next steps will be the implementation across the entire production workflow from pre through post-production, and promoting the ring scope as a visualization tool shared between the creative and technical teams. And I think it's important to explore alternative color spaces. Currently, we're using D50 setup with Bradford cat, which was standardized by the CIE, as I said. But the setup has some known limitations. For example, the non-uniformity and some artifacts in the blue hue angle. Alternative color spaces would be the CCAM16, which is ongoing CIE work. Another alternative would be the ICT-CP, which was optimized for HDR and wide color gamut display encoding. But please note that the CIE standard color appearance spaces and ICT-CP space employs different chromatic adaptation models or assumptions. So therefore, we cannot be directly compared. But I hope we can feed back to the color science community by using the Gamut rings with a bunch of color spaces. And we have a booth to demonstrate the Gamut rings over there. And recently, I added an ROI features on the image, and these ROIs are draggable even while they're capturing a video. And conclusion, Gamut rings color scope provides a unified view of lightness, chroma, and hue angle in a perceptual way, and compared to the conventional color scopes, it reveals more meaningful color structures, and lightweight implementations enables real-time operation, making it practical for use in interactive color grading environments. And the perceptually intuitive visualization is expected to facilitate more efficient and effective color grading with smoother communication between colorists and the directors. And I would thank Nakama-san, Kanamaru-san, and Mitsuhashi-san, and other production art technical staff for their invaluable collaboration in the trial application of the ring scope, and special thanks to ICDM experts. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We've got time for a couple questions. Again, please submit via the QR code if you would like. I'm going to start out with a question that I have as I've been reviewing your work and following you. How do you represent the encoded white? Where does it appear since the top ring has to stretch so far around all the rings below it? So if you have pixels that are 255, 255, 255, where do they render onto gamut rings?
You mean the reference white?
Reference white, yeah. 111. Where does it?
The current gamut rings is the use of gamut rings is limited to SDR, and we assume the nominal reference white at the peak level, peak 20 to 55 code, without considering it real.
Yeah, I think I'll come by your booth and get to see it for myself because I'm curious where white would visualize on the rings. A question from the audience. Have you approached any existing scope manufacturers or softwares about implementing this scope?
As I said, FF Pictures implemented the gamut rings scope for the standard application and the plugin for DaVinci Resolve, but it used GPUs, the CUDA programming, and we used shade colors to speed up the rendering. I want to fix it. Yeah.
Very good. Any other questions? All right, let's thank our speaker.
Thank you very much.